We have a pretty extreme challenge. The IPCC report last year said we have to reduce emissions globally by 50%. By 50% in 10 years. They went up last year, and they've gone up pretty well consistently for the last 30 years. It's rather a severe challenge. We know we have failed so abysmally at getting emissions down as a global community that we will have 2 degrees plus warming, and we have to plan accordingly. That means we now need to be very worried about the adaptation and resilience challenge. We need to prepare for a world of cyclones and hurricanes that are 3 times as intense as they currently are, with extraordinary consequent damage to property and to lives, floods, heat stress, and so on. God knows how many people will die when we start seeing 50-degree days in Europe for weeks on end, which we will start seeing in the next 20 years. Let alone the impact on India, where we're seeing 50-degree days right now on extended periods in the northern plains. So the task is immense. This is a species-defying threat. There is a chance that the species won't exist in 100 to 200 years based on current trajectories, if only because the air we breathe is going to be around 800 ppm by the end of this century on current trajectories. 415 now, 250, 150 years ago. 800 ppm is as if we are trapped in a faceless room in BNP Paribas headquarters all afternoon with the air conditioning turned off. And we're talking like this. You know how you get really drowsy after 3 hours in those rooms? That's 800 ppm. Imagine the whole atmosphere like that. Humans have never existed in a world of that intensity of ESGs. We don't know whether species can survive. And that's putting aside the epidemics, the pestilence, the wars, the famine that we will experience this century. Of course, the absurdity about this is we know we've got the capital, we're swimming in capital, as my friend Amin at BNP Paribas will tell us. We have $100 trillion floating around in money and institutional investment accounts, of which an extraordinary amount in Europe, 21% of European institutional investment capital, is invested in 0 and negative rate instruments, which is no way to pay my pension. We need a big yield. Now, where will we find that yield? Well, it just so happens, as someone said earlier, we've got to invest about $93 trillion in a transition to a green economy, to a low carbon and climate resilient economy. That is going to be yield. That is going to be stimulus. That is going to be growth. That is going to be jobs and livelihoods, if we do it right. Of course, the bulk of that is in emerging markets. 75 to 80% is in emerging markets. We need to start thinking differently. France has not been good in terms of its allocation to emerging markets at an institutional investment level. It has to become more aggressive. It has to look for it. It has to partner with public sector institutions like Agence France Development with risk mitigation efforts to ensure that they can invest in emerging markets where some 75 to 80% of all the capex that we're going to spend in the next 30 years lies. That's our export opportunity for Europe too. We are a developed economy. We are not going to see substantial growth in the future unless we export to emerging markets. We have to be thinking much more aggressively about how we develop Nigeria, how we develop Senegal, how we develop India, how we support their transitions. Now, we have to do it for a resilience reason. Because if those economies implode and collapse like Syria or Somalia or other countries in the next 20 to 30 years, which is frankly on the cards now, there'll be a whole-scale movement of people from those countries to places where they can find help. And that's us here. They will need to come here. We will need to welcome them. But that's going to be extraordinarily dislocating. And of course, probably fuel the rise of more Viktor Orbans. Wine is enough, please. And that's the sort of thing that we face now as a challenge. So it's imperative that we make Africa richer and wealthier and more resilient and fairer and more equal, not just to achieve the SDGs, not just to improve their ability to be able to deal with climate shocks that they're going to experience, but also for our own futures. And of course, if we do it, it'll be an export boom. So we have green bonds as evidence that if we create products that address climate change, investors will invest at scale. You heard Anthony Raquin talk about the success of the French sovereign. Of course, that's now being replicated by multiple issuers. The Dutch sovereign, for adaptation investments, no less. The Chilean sovereign, 2 bonds in a couple of weeks. And and so on. Not to mention all the corporates, all the MDBs that we have to thank for pioneering this market. And I say thank you to EDF, by the way, for being one of the inaugural issues in this market and helping grow it. Thank you to BNP Paribas, thank you to HSBC who have issued bonds to show the market how to do it, to grow it. And now we have a market that will hit about $1 trillion a year outstanding in the first half of next year. So it's growing. France's sovereign has been especially important to show governments what to do. Someone made a joke about Poland beating France. Actually, Poland copied France, got in early because France had been talking about it and laying the groundwork. Bear that in mind. The French stimulated the Polish green bond. Benchmark issuance, liquidity, these are things that sovereigns can do. We have a lot to do. We've got a few things, 4 things to do next. First, pipeline. We need a pipeline of investments. We have the money. We have the demand. We have the bankers ready to do deals. What we do not have is enough deals on the table. Now, part of that is starting to work with industry on brown to green strategies. Yes, we do need to look at the steel industry and identify how it's going to meet the new criteria we've set in the taxonomy, the European Union taxonomy, over a 5 to 10 year period. That becomes a transition strategy, that becomes investable by equity, by bonds. We need to have that engagement across all the difficult sectors. We need steel, we need aluminium, we need copper, we need nickel. We need all the sectors of industry, apart from maybe a couple of heavily fossil fuel ones, to make this transition. We need to work with them to achieve that transition. But we also need urban development. We also need stronger building regulation, as France and the UK have brought in with new buildings. But not every country has. We need to now start applying that to all buildings, to upgrade our stock. We need to shift to low carbon transport. Can we get on off HS2, please? We need high-speed rail everywhere because 75% of global aviation emissions come from short-haul flights between here and Paris. Is anyone flying back to Paris? Thank God. Low-carbon transport, please. We're in rail from now on. Or battery-operated aeroplanes, if we can invest in them. We do need to start thinking about agriculture. The largest source of emissions in Europe is agriculture. We need to convert that to the largest source of sequestration. The common agricultural policy needs to become the carbon agricultural policy. We have incredible capacity to soak up carbon. And you will have seen a statement in the media a couple of days ago about the opportunity for forests. Yes, the biggest opportunity for sequestration on this planet is forestry growth. Massive forestry growth. Not a few trees in the garden out there. 50% forestry growth globally, particularly in tropical zones, but also in England, where in the 1600s and 1700s we decided we didn't need forests. We want to put sheep on the land and create monocultures, deserts. We need to reforest the UK, folks, as well as reforest tropical zones. These are opportunities. We will need blended finance. French investors do need to, as English investors do need to have a great exposure to emerging markets. They're not going to do it on their own. It's too difficult. It's got to be a partnership with multinational development banks who can do the risk mitigation to make these deals work. Amundi's Ego Fund is a good example of a fund that can provide a blended finance instrument. We will need more active engagement on capacity building. The UK has actually been the leader in capacity building around climate finance for the last few years. A bigger budget in this area than the French. Despite everything, all the other lunacy going on here, they've managed to maintain that. And that is fantastic, and that is growing. More of that, more partnerships, please, between France and Europe on that particular issue. We need better enabling regulation. Supervisors, it is such a joy to go to NGFS meetings now with the secretariat provided by the Banque de France, to look at disclosures, to discuss incentives and so on, to learn from the Chinese. Isn't that a change? To learn from the Chinese about what the central bank is doing, to give discount for the liquidity lending window for banks who provide green bonds as collateral, and various other measures that regulators can take. But of course, we need governments to be focusing on the regulatory agenda as part of it too. And the signalling agenda, zero tailpipe for transport, is a signalling step, which shows there will be a transition to electric. It's only a matter of time. Investors take note, think about your long-term investments and all that accordingly. We need clarity and simplicity in definitions. That's what the European Union taxonomy attempts to do. Science-based, not policy-based, IPCC-based. That is the point. It is about keeping transaction costs low, not high, simplifying it, There are some lines we have drawn in the European taxonomy. They're privileged to be part of the development group. We have said, unfortunately, according to the IPCC and the International Energy Agency last year, two landmark reports, there can be no new gas, unabated. No new gas. That has very significant implications for energy policy in every country, including large swathes of Europe. Think about that. Coal is gone, as far as I'm concerned. Coal is basically out. Gas is the current fight. Most people do not understand this. But none of the models will allow for new gas. Yes, improving old gas, there'll be some discussion there, as long as we address fugitive emissions, because we now know we have massive leakage out of the gas network, particularly in the US. And unless we know where that's coming from and we address it, we cannot trust gas. This is new. This is a new understanding and deeply challenging to the thinking we've been doing in the past. On the other hand, grids, all grids should be in. We have to electrify the planet. So massive grid investments suddenly become part of the green universe. Agri-resilience. Let me just finish up with a comment on resilience. It's about resilient infrastructure, such as the Dutch have done with coastal defence. It's also about ecosystem resilience. We have hollowed out our ecosystems. Many of you have been snorkeling in the Mediterranean and also in the Pacific. You will know the Mediterranean is a desert when it comes to fish. We have ruined that sea. We need to repopulate that sea with fish. If we don't repopulate, it will become a desert very quickly with a few climate shocks. And the same thing applies to forests, to landscapes, where we have removed biodiversity by killing off species. We need to rewild big chunks of this planet to ensure that biodiversity can develop. 15% at least of the oceans and 15% of our countries should be allocated to wilderness. And I don't mean half-baked wilderness like the South Downs National Park in the UK with a few farms. I mean genuine wilderness, turning the Lakes District into a forested area, and get the damn sheep off. And lastly, social resilience. Now, inequality is a predictor of fragility of societies and collapse of societies. We are going to have a century of volatility, extreme volatility. We need to ensure that we can minimise the collapse of societies when they get hit by a famine, when they get hit by a massive cyclone, when they get hit by one thing or another, including wars next door. How do we do that? One of the things we address is inequality. One of the things we addressed is gender equality. You know, in a study of floods in Bangladesh caused by extreme climate change, increased floods, there's an extraordinarily disturbing statistic that 70% of the deaths are women. Not 50%, 70%. Why is that happening? Further analysis, they don't read, they don't get access to education, they can't read the warnings, they're stuck at home, their men are out, they aren't able to escape. They die. I mean, that is human rights, folks. This is an outrage. The response is making sure that there is education and opportunity for women in all societies. That becomes a climate resilience investment, as well as a human rights investment. These are the things we have to start engaging in as we map out an agenda for a century of extreme volatility. In the 1600s, we experienced climate change. We had 2 degrees cooling thanks to killing off all the American Indians in the 1500s. Massive forest regrowth in the Amazon, brought down carbon levels, global cooling, a century of famine, pestilence and war. We lost 1/3 of the world's population in the 1600s. Read the history, it's chilling about what we're going into now. One country stood out. Japan did not suffer the population loss. A strong government, the shogun, newly elected after a war, if you've seen the movies, Kurosawa movies, did a few things that were really important. They ensured that food was distributed to the poor and the people affected by famine. They ensured that the infrastructure was rebuilt. They ensured that the forests were regrown by putting incentives for villages and forests. Ever since then, forest cover in Japan has gone up. In 1500, it was looking like any ugly Haitian third world country. The forests have gone. They recovered their environment. We now need to do this globally. We are not going to do it as an individual country. It's one planet, one atmosphere, one climate. We have to do this together. This means collaboration. Yes, competition between the UK and France, 2 leaders, although France is the largest green bond market, I want to stress. But we need to work together to solve this agenda. We need to build and strengthen global institutions, because in a world of volatility, we might atomise. If we atomise, we are dead. If we atomise and try and escape behind our walls, we will be hit by pestilence and famine and disease, which will kill us all eventually. We don't escape in the rich world when it comes to epidemics, and if you read the World Health Organization report and the IPCC Health Committee, you will see what I mean. A century of epidemics is what we can expect. We need the World Health Organization to have quadruple, quintuple the current budget so we can parachute into places like the Congo right now where the Ebola is raging and address them in countries that don't have health systems. We need UNHCR to be beefed up. This is what France and the UK can work on together as countries that are still committed to the global order now that the US has left the scene. This is a partnership. This is what the EU can work on. Right today, this moment in Brussels, is a collection, or is a meeting of countries to form an international sustainable alliance on sustainable finance, international coalition on sustainable finance. The core countries convened by the European Commission, with France and Germany sitting at the side, are India and China. There are representatives from Japan and Chile. These are countries who want to work on sustainable finance. We need to establish new coalitions. We need to accept the G20 may not work if the US has gone feral. We have to look elsewhere. And we have to make sure that we work together on creating a green revolution fast. Green bonds start the process. They're an icebreaker tool, but we all know it's only a starter pack. It's a useful starter pack. The question is now, how can we massively scale this up? Reduce emissions by half in 10 years' time, and take this revolution to our emerging market friends who have to cope with much bigger problems than we cope with, but who also have societies that are going to grow. Lagos is going to be a city of 100 million people in 2100. 100 million people. If we can help them make the shift to becoming a green, clean, livable, productive city, think of what that means for the opportunities. Think of what that means for the kind of knowledge expertise. Think about what that means for the energy efficiency companies, the building companies, for the Alstoms, the transports. They will have to have 100 subway lines, not the one they have now. Think opportunity. The revolution is about opportunity. Thank you.